Thank you, Mark, to give us some time. From a mere tool of communication, do you think AIR will ever cross the Rubicon and become a broadcaster for transformative change?
Well, I don't think that AIR can really become a fully fledged broadcaster for transformative change, because for that you need to have autonomy and freedom, and AIR does not have that. But I would just like to say that two things. Firstly, that All India Radio has had a very major impact, particularly in its early days, on culture in India, and remarkable work in the renaissance of Indian culture following independence. And secondly, of course, by putting the government's message across. That is not an entirely negative thing to do. The trouble is, it's not a balanced message, and many people tend to discount it or disbelieve it because it is the government's point of view. But nevertheless, it is an important point of view for development and for the way the country is run.
You've been here for a long time. You've watched very closely the struggle which has gone on to have an independent public service broadcaster. Now, what are the lessons we have to learn from what we have done in the past, and how do we move ahead?
I think the first lesson you have to learn is that bureaucrats and politicians never want to give away power. And having power over a medium like All India Radio is a very important thing. And there are all sorts of other reasons as well why politicians don't want to give up power, and nor do bureaucrats. So that's the first thing you have to overcome. The second thing you have to overcome is that India really is not good at establishing autonomous institutions and maintaining their autonomy. And you see that in all sorts of fields. You see it in the field of the civil service, for instance, which instead of fiercely defending its autonomy, succumbs time and time and time again to political interference. And so you've seen with All India Radio a really genuine push forward, very much under the leadership of a wonderful journalist called George Verghese, to create an autonomous organization, and something emerged from that, Prasar Bharati. But unfortunately, that has suffered the fate of every other attempt, virtually, to have an autonomous organization in this country.
In Jan Prasar, when we were struggling for Prasar Bharati, we had a member who later became a Prime Minister. We also had a member who later became the Information and Broadcasting Minister. But they went thus far, they didn't go beyond a point, you see, in carrying the whole agenda forward. So you have this kind of thing, you reach a point and then you withdraw.
Well, I think probably what happened was that point of view changed quite radically when they, from being in favor of independence, when they got into power, they saw what to them was the cost of it, I suppose, No,
but what are the lessons do you think we have to learn from public service broadcasting, say for instance in Britain?
Well, I think the prime lesson you need to learn is that public service broadcasting is not the same as government broadcasting. Public service broadcasting has two sort of principles to it in a way. One principle is not to be controlled by the government, not to allow the government to interfere in its autonomy. The other principle is not to be overruled by commercial considerations, as most of the other people are, and therefore not to do programs, judge the programs you're going to do simply by their commercial merit. And the point of it, and the end result of this, one hopes, and I believe it to be true in England, is that public service broadcasting does have an impact on private or commercial broadcasting, because the commercial broadcasters see that that if they go too far, if they become too populist, too jejune, that they will look stupid, because people will see what the BBC is doing. And it is true to say that still in Britain, despite the plethora of public service of commercial broadcasting now, in times of trouble or in times when people really want to know what is happening, people do tend still to turn to the BBC. So credibility is, of course, another very, very important thing for a public service broadcaster.
No, even if we talk of the BBC, there have been problems. I mean, there has been a kind of a, attempt to control it by the government, but BBC has withstood that kind of invasion into its autonomy.
Well, I don't think it's just the BBC which has withstood it. You're absolutely right. There have been attempts to do this, and at times the government has been extremely angry with the BBC. Only recently it appeared as though the previous Conservative government wanted to run the BBC with a board on which there would be a lot of government nominees. Well, that seems to have been withdrawn. But it's not just the government, it is the public as well. It is the public support for the BBC. I believe politicians realize that it is not a popular thing to interfere with the BBC.
Now, if we were to talk of a paradigm of transformative change and broadcasting, I know it's not to be run like a sarkari office, you see. It has to be, you have to bring in, as you have done in your career as a broadcaster, passion as a broadcaster. So, but what kind of transformative change do you foresee a public service broadcaster bringing in a scenario like India?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. The one great change which has to come in compared with what you have in India is a total removal of the sort of sarkari, bureaucratic, babu type attitude, and the regulations as well. The regulations must be written for a broadcasting organization, not for a government department. And that includes the financial regulations. You can't have the sort of regulations demanded by the Controller and Auditor General and others of government organizations. So this is one of the most important things. And of course, we've had this huge debate in the BBC on another matter, which is to get the balance right between broadcasting and management. Obviously, broadcasting is an expensive thing, and even if your money is coming from the license payer, even if you are not looking for profit, nevertheless you will be criticized and attacked if you are wasteful. So you do need a management which manages things efficiently and as economically as possible. But at the same time, you must not allow that management to become so heavy-handed that in some sort of way it becomes nearer like the government of India is in All India Radio. And this is a debate which has been going on in the BBC ever since the 90s, when a Director General called John Burt became Director General and consulted a lot of management consultants and introduced a wholly new management system. And this debate continues to today.
When the new government came to power under Modi, so he started this Man Ki Baat on radio. And in fact, the day he did his first broadcast, All India Radio invited me to speak about it in a discussion program the same night on AIR. And I said that this is fine, but I mean, the Prime Minister addressing the public and using it as a tool of communication gives the medium an importance. There's no doubt. But then it has to go down also, right through, and the autonomy of the institution has to be protected. So now what is happening is that the Prime Minister addresses, and that's it. But there's no transformation internally which is to take place. Is such an important medium.
Well, I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has chosen radio to give his broadcasts on. I think radio is a grossly underestimated media in this country, and as someone who has worked in radio for 50-odd years now, I know the huge pleasure which is to be got out of listening to radio and working in radio too. So I'm very pleased about that. I also think it's perfectly appropriate for the Prime Minister to broadcast an occasional message on All India Radio, and it would be so in my view, even if All India Radio was autonomous. But you're absolutely right. This is just one broadcast and has nothing really to do with the question of the autonomy of the organization. It doesn't improve the autonomy of the organization or anything like that.
No, or transform it, as a greater tool of communication of the government policies also.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't transform it like that. No, absolutely not. And of course, if overused, I mean, if every minister was to come on regularly and do Man Ki Baats and that sort of thing, then it would undermine its own purpose, and it would be absolutely negative rather than a positive purpose for the government.
No, now, recently we had that incident in Una where the Dalits were attacked. Now, if it was a transformative medium, now what role would it have played in stopping this kind of anti-Dalit build-up?
Well, you know, one must not overestimate the power of the media. Some people seem to think that the media can stop anything or start anything, create anything. Of course, that's not true. But if you had an independent media, the most important autonomous media, public sector media, most important thing you should get, was quick, reliable news about what was happening, so that people could make up their own minds as to what they thought was right and what was wrong about what had happened. And this business of giving quick, authentic news, which people know they can trust, is even more important now in the days of the social media, because the social media are full of lies and people misuse the social media massively to spread rumors. And so it's even more important that you should have an organization like All India Radio, which, if it was autonomous, would be an organization people could turn to confirm whether the rumor was true or not, whether it was a lie or not.
No, I was wanting to ask you, in this kind of process of transformative change, like bringing in scientific temper, like bringing in the constitution as an ideology, bringing in secularism. All these are very critical values for the survival of our country. So how do these come in? I mean, radio would be a transformative tool?
Well, yes, I mean, I don't, I'm not entirely happy with this phrase transformative, because I think you're probably putting too much onto radio there. But it could certainly be a major part in a transformation. And it could play a major role in a transformation, even as a government-controlled organisation. And who am I to judge my colleagues in All India Radio as to whether they are doing as well as they can in that role? But, you know, we can't really just say to radio, please transform the awareness of the Constitution, or please transform the attitude to women, or please stop rape, or something like that. You can't say that.
No, but you can speak truth to power.
Absolutely, yes, that is true. But you speak truth to power by telling the truth. That is the real way in which it should be done, you know. But I cannot stress the fact that media in general have an influence and have power, but they are not all powerful or all transformative.
That's the last question. New modes, you know, like social audit through radio. Now, do you think that's possible?
To some extent, yes. I mean, I remember years ago, and I don't know what happened to them, there were programs in Ahmedabad mounted by the satellite center there, whereby they would go into villages and they would ask the villagers what's wrong in your village, or what do you need, or something like that. And they would say that the bridge is broken, or Nala has got blocked up, or something like that. And then this would be broadcast. And then about 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, whatever it was, they'd go back again and they'd do an audit. They'd see whether the thing had been broken or not. And of course the impact of that on the bureaucracy was quite considerable. They thought, yes, gosh, I'd better go and mend that bridge, otherwise I'll be in the doghouse in a couple of weeks' time. So that sort of social audit, certainly they can do it. Of course they can do programs which are in effect social audits. They can do programs with sociologists, with economists, with NGOs who are running those social audits. Society. Yeah,
yes.
With all those people, you know.
No, but can it be a hub for grievances? I mean, that's possible, or that's extending it too far? People's grievances, I mean, of a local community. If they have
well, I think that certainly community radio can be very effective for that, but it needs managing, because you can't have everyone standing up, and giving their grievances, otherwise you get involved in people's matrimonial disputes, things like that, So it has to be tightly controlled to some
and
extent.
then also there has to be a complete decentralization. It is too metrocentric, you think, radio now in India?
I think all our media are too metro-centered. All the media in India are too metrocentric, and I think in Britain as well there is a tendency for them to be too metrocentric. That is why, for instance, the BBC has moved a whole raft of its programming up to Salford, just outside or just next to Manchester, to try and take some of the programming out of the metropolis London.
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you.
Good, right.
Thank you.